Hi there, I'm Miss DePoy, and today I'm going to be reading The Egypt Gang, and I'm going to be doing Chapter 9 called Summoned by the Mighty Ones. Right up until a few days before the end of the month, it really looked as if Halloween was going to be completely wasted. Of course, there was going to be a program at school, and kids who wanted to could wear their costumes to afternoon classes, but only little primary kids got very excited about that. The real fun of Halloween, trick-or-treating, and being allowed to tear around out of doors late at night was absolutely out. At least, that was what all the parents in the neighborhood were saying all month long. Unless, of course, the murderer had been caught by then. But as day after day went by with nothing new in the papers, there seemed little hope of that. And then, with only 3 more days to go, suddenly there was good news. At a PTA meeting at Wilson School, a couple of really red-blooded mothers stood up and volunteered their husbands to take large groups of trick-or-treaters around the neighborhood. Before long, some other fathers got shamed or nagged into doing the same thing, and by the day before Halloween, nearly all the kids at Wilson were signed up to go trick-or-treating with some large chaperoned group. Mr. Barkley and Mr. Kamada were going to be the chaperones for all the kids who lived in the Casa Rosada, and the rest of the 800 block of Orchard Avenue. Mr. Barkley was the father of some 6-year-old twins who lived on the first floor of the Casa Rosada, and Mr. Kamada was from Kamada's Realty, just across the street, and the father of Ken Kamada, who was in April and Melanie's class at Wilson. April had it figured out that there were at least 25 kids who would be going with Mr. Barkley and Mr. Kamada, and that was a lot of kids to keep track of, particularly in the dark, which opened the way for a fascinating and frightening scheme. If, April decided, the Egypt gang all stayed together, there might be a chance to slip away from the big group to pay a visit to Egypt. Their flashlights and jack-o'-lanterns would be enough to light up the storage yard at least a little, and it would be really terrific. A nighttime ceremony in the spooky half-light, and with everybody wearing their new Egyptian costumes. They would only stay for a few minutes, and they'd get back to the trick-or-treaters before they were missed. When April first told Melanie about her plan, Melanie thought it was just about the most exciting idea she'd ever heard. She agreed to everything, even to not telling Elizabeth until Halloween night, so that she wouldn't have too long to worry about it. Elizabeth had a tendency to worry about things like not having permission. She might not understand that it was not at all like being downright disobedient. As April pointed out, no one had forbidden them to visit Egypt on Halloween night. Melanie did just mention that maybe that was because nobody knew about Egypt. But April just grinned and said, "Yeah, I know. Lucky, isn't it?" Later, when Melanie began to think about it in private, she began to have some doubts. Even though the Egypt gang had decided that the professor was innocent, what if they just might be wrong? Or what if the professor was innocent, but the somebody else who wasn't really did live right in the neighborhood, as so many people seem to think? In that case, a trip to Egypt might be a lot worse than downright disobedient. It might be deadly dangerous. Downright disobedient and deadly dangerous. The two phrases seemed to get stuck in Melanie's head. The night before Halloween, she woke up several times with those 4 words throbbing through her thoughts. By morning, she decided to tell April that she'd changed her mind. But the next day, Melanie had an early morning piano lesson, so there was no time to talk to April before school. And at school, there were always too many people around. Even though Melanie tried all day to find an opportunity, she still hadn't told April about her decision when the time came to get into their costumes. April had been keeping all the costumes in a box in her closet, and it had been decided that they would all get ready at her place. On the way up, Melanie and Marshall met Elizabeth in the hall. Melanie had been almost hoping that Elizabeth would have her 2 sisters along. That would have to put an end to the Egypt question without her having to say anything. But no such luck. Elizabeth explained that her little sisters were staying home because they were afraid of the dark and of all the big kids in their costumes. When they reached April's apartment, Mrs. Hall met them at the door. Come in, she said. April's all dressed already. She's in her room." April looked great. She was wearing her Egyptian headdress, and under her sheer jeweled robe, she had on the short tunic made out of a pillowcase. Around the bottom of the pillowcase, there were Egyptian-looking decorations done in red and black crayon. But best of all were her face and hair. For once, her false eyelashes were on straight, and she had heavy black eye makeup that made her eyes look long and mysterious. But most surprising was her hair. It was cut short in a sort of Cleopatra bob. "Caroline helped me with my face and hair," April said, and she looked at Caroline and smiled. It occurred to Melanie that it was the first time she'd ever seen April smile at her grandmother. It also occurred to her that April wasn't going to be able to wear an upsweep anymore, but she didn't say anything about that. Instead, she only said, "Your hair looks terrific, April. You ought to wear it like that all the time." Mrs. Hall reminded them that they'd better hurry so they wouldn't keep the other trick-or-treaters waiting, and then she went out and left them alone. April shut the door of her room behind her grandmother, and then she turned around very slowly and dramatically to face the rest of the Egypt gang. One look at her face and Melanie had a strong feeling that downright disobedient and even deadly dangerous weren't going to be enough. She felt herself slipping before she was even sure of the direction in which they were moving. April put her arms down stiffly along her sides, and with her eyes closed, she tilted her Egyptian face upward raptly. To Melanie, she looked like a miniature monolith, glowing with mystery. "We have received a message," April whispered with her eyes still closed. "We are summoned by the mighty ones of Egypt." "The mighty ones?" Elizabeth's voice quavered a little. April snapped back into life and snatched up something from her dresser. It was a little velvet pincushion box that she kept special things on. "It's in here," she said, holding the box out dramatically until they had all gathered around. "The summons from Set and Isis," Melanie said. It was a statement instead of a question, and with a last lingering dismay, she realized that she was already using her high priestess voice. April nodded, and her eyes flicked across Melanie's in the way they always did when their imaginations were tuned in. The gods of Egypt struggled with the gods of conscience, and Egypt won. "The mighty ones have summoned us," Melanie chanted and dropped to her knees. Following Melanie's lead, April was on her knees almost as quickly, and Elizabeth and Marshall weren't far behind. Slowly, and with drama, April opened the box. There, on a cushion of paper handkerchiefs, was a single shiny feather. "Just a few moments ago," April whispered, "I heard something, a strange sound outside my window. I'd been expecting something. I'd had a weird feeling all day long. Hadn't you?" They all nodded, and Melanie didn't even remember what kind of feeling she'd really been having all day. "So I ran to the window and threw it open, and there it was, right on the seal, a token from the mighty ones." "Evil Set and beautiful Isis have sent us a token," Melanie chanted. She nudged Elizabeth with her elbow and whispered, "You say, the mighty ones have summoned us to their temple." "The mighty ones have summoned us to their temple," Elizabeth imitated Melanie's singing chant. April poked Marshall. "You say, we have received your summons, O mighty ones." "We have received your summons, O mighty ones," Marshall chanted, and then ad-libbed, "and it's nothing but an old pigeon feather." He scanned the girls' faces expectantly, but they chose to ignore him. While they were getting into their costumes, Elizabeth asked a few worried questions about what they were going to do, but April only said, "I don't know. We'll have to stick close together and look for a sign." "What sort of sign?" Elizabeth wanted to know. "A secret omen," Melanie said. "Will it be a pigeon feather?" Marshall asked. "We don't know what it will be," April told him. "But we will know it when it appears." She clasped her hands and struck a wonder and amazement pose. "The very air will smell of mystery," she breathed. Marshall sniffed thoughtfully as April got him into his crown and robe and tried to make his baby round eyes look long and mysterious with the eyebrow pencil. She was more successful with Elizabeth's and Melanie's eyes. They both had beautiful eyes anyway. Elizabeth's were exotic, long and tilted, and Melanie's were luxurious, velvet and ivory, fringed with black silk. With the Egyptian makeup, they both looked fantastic. By the time they'd gotten Elizabeth's ponytail tucked inside her Nefertiti headdress, it was almost 7 o'clock. They started to rush out, but in the hallway they noticed that Marshall wasn't with them. They dashed back and found him in the closet with April's pin box. He was calm as they grabbed him out of the closet, snatched away the pin box, and scolded him across the living room to the hall door. "I was just smelling the mystery, like April said," he was explaining patiently, when suddenly grabbed hold of the doorframe and howled, "Stop!" The result was a 4-way collision of Egyptians in the doorway. Marshall kept on yelling, "Stop!" and Elizabeth yelled, "Ouch!" because somebody stepped on her. And April yelled, "What the?" But Melanie knew right away what the matter was. She ran back into the bedroom and got security from where he'd been left on April's bed. And at last, the Egyptians were on their way. And that is the end of Chapter 9.